Here we are with Ben Harris. Ben's doing a talk today on the challenges of long-term healthcare facilities, also known as rest homes. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much, Kerry.
Yeah, Ben, can you tell me a bit about your talk that you're doing with rest homes?
Sure. Essentially, I'm going to put into the reality that they're like a huge hospital. So in New Zealand, there's 40,000 residents in long-term care facilities or rest homes. They have a mortality rate of about 20% within 6 months, unless they've come back from an acute hospital, and that increases to 36%.
That's terrible.
It is a reality. So it's a hospice, and for many, and it's in their end of life, and there's often 2.5 or more underlying comorbidities and an increasing extreme age, all of which makes them more likely to get infections.
Okay. Is it because they want to stay home for as long as possible, and then once they can't manage, they then go into the rest home?
That's a graceful way of putting it, but that's nudged along by by government funding.
I see.
And the funding is there to be spread the best it can, so it's being primarily channeled into favouring hospital care and dementia care, so they're even more challenging still.
And I guess with the ageing population that's happening in New Zealand at the moment, we're going to be seeing more of this coming through.
Dramatically, so the old, not just the over 65-year-olds, but the over 80, 85-year-olds are increasing even faster, and all those comorbidities are adding to the mix even more, which is making it more challenging when a registered nurse will have many unregistered staff under them to do a fantastic job in a really challenging situation. And that happens around the world.
Around the world?
Yeah, it's the same challenge around the world. Except there are a few communities that keep their elderly at home.
Oh, right.
But we're not one of them.
Oh, aren't we? Oh, that's
we're not one of them.
Okay, so you talked about one of the challenges, which was the rest home staff. There's one nurse looking after, like a registered nurse looking after staff who aren't registered, is that right?
And they have quite a high turnover here and around the world. One facility talking to recently was 40% turnover. So if you are the RN looking after 50, 60 residents with a number of relatively untrained, no formal trained carers underneath to do the manual tasks, and most recent studies showed that it was the carers that the residents talked to most about their end of life type, rather than the RN, rather than the GP, rather than anybody else. It was actually the cleaner they talked to most.
Is that right? Gosh, that's unfortunate for continuity of care.
It is reality that the cleaner gives the most continuity of verbal discussion, at least.
Wow, okay. So have you got any solutions of what we could do to try and address the challenges?
One of the challenges and realities is a significant number of people that are compromised because they've got the underlying illnesses. They get febrile conditions and infections. So the infections, given that scenario, has to be diagnosed as simply as possible by people that are relatively untrained. And in New Zealand, around the world, the dipstick comes into its own, because by far the most common infection is a urinary tract infection. So the temptation is, if I stub my toe, a carer may follow process, do a dipstick, and if it's positive for white cells and nitrites and such like, it gets sent off to the laboratory to see whether they have an infection or not. Seems like a good idea. There's a communication breakdown. The laboratory believes that that urine will have only been sent if that resident had clinical symptoms. Not that they stubbed their toe,
of a UTI.
that they had frequency dysuria and had clinical symptoms. So the laboratory believes that must have happened, otherwise it would not have been sent, should not have been sent. So they do the full workup, large numbers of white cells, heavy E. coli report, the antibiotic susceptibilities, goes back to the GP, back to the rest home, the family and whānau, and everyone believes the laboratory thinks there must have been a UTI, and that once the urine is sent, it's likely to be treated. Now the error of that, if I may.
Yes.
The error is, one, the laboratory can never ever tell if a patient has got a urinary tract infection. The laboratory can say if this person's got symptoms and you make that decision, if they've got symptoms, then we can tell you the most likely infection. That's the first thing. The second thing is dipsticks. When we're under 65-year-olds, our urine is generally sterile. Actually, it's not quite true. 5% of us, 5 in 100, have large numbers of white cells and bacteria, and the dipsticks would be positive.
Oh, right.
But we don't look for it unless it's antenatal or pre-op urology. We don't look for it. And people do not pay to go and see a GP to say, I'm feeling well, can you do a dipstick?
Exactly.
So we don't know. Over 65-year-olds, that 5% increases to 12%. That will have large numbers of bacteria in their bladder, large numbers of white cells, smelly turbid urine, but no symptoms, and a positive dipstick.
Okay.
We don't look for it, we don't check it. Over 65-year-olds in a long-term care facility, that increases to 30 to 50%. Have asymptomatic bacteriuria, turbid, cloudy urine, high numbers of white cells, bacteria, nitrites positive dipsticks. No symptoms. The other half that don't have the large numbers of bacteria without symptoms, half of them have large numbers of white cells. 80% of residents in a long-term care facility will have a positive dipstick. So if I stub my toe, then I'll have a positive dipstick, and if the urine's sent to the lab, there's a good chance it's going to grow a heavy E. coli, even if I had no urinary symptoms. All of those facilities that we have had dipsticks banned from for some years now, their so-called urinary tract infection rate, because the GP asked, what's their dipstick? Or the carer has gone ahead and done a dipstick and sent it, we have stopped around 80% of the UTIs, 80% of the antibiotic usage as a result of them banning it. And the more recent one was a very large facility which was part of a New Zealand-wide chain. And that's useful because the rest homes do their ongoing stats. And they had had the highest UTI rate every month for a year at their facility compared to any of their other facilities New Zealand-wide. After the discussion covering what I have, they banned dipsticks. They've now had the lowest UTI rate every month for 2.5 years compared to any others New Zealand-wide. They have the objective evidence of that. The antibiotic usage has gone down 80%, so the resistance breeding factory has gone down 80%. But on top of that, the clinical managers have made the subjective decision that all their residents, their health has gone up one notch.
Oh, really? Is that right?
Which we would expect because they have not wiped out their microbiomes, their gut flora.
All right.
And we know with dementia, as we get more debilitated, we have less species in our gut flora. What we don't know is when we get less species, do we get debilitated? Or do we get debilitated and get less species?
What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
That's right, we've yet to learn that. But with a full microbiome, with a full mass of bugs, we're likely to be much better health.
So you'd like to see, if I can read between the lines, dipsticks gone from rest homes?
Absolutely, without doubt. The only time they have a role, and this gets lost in translation, is if the dipstick is negative, you can pretty reliably rule out urinary tract infection. That will only happen in 2 out of 10 residents. So if a resident is febrile, we need to be more concerned. But only 10% of the time will it be caused because of a urinary tract infection. Almost all studies show that, unless they're catheterized, and that increases to 30%. But still, other sites are more likely. When they're febrile, even if the main cause is another site, for instance respiratory, their urine will still have large numbers of bacteria and we don't know, so it tends to be called, oh, it must have been the urine, but it may not have been the urine at all. So ban dipsticks completely, just with the caveat, if they're febrile and the dipstick is negative, which will be 20% of the time, you know actually this time it's probably not the urine that's the focus.
Look somewhere else.
Look somewhere else. But you should look, if a patient or resident is febrile, the first thing you should do, not the dipstick, look at the chest, look at the breath rate, look at the sores, ulcers, Look at the ears, look in the mouth to make sure there's not another localized site first. If you cannot find another localized site, then send away a urine, and it's likely to come back positive. Go ahead and treat. It may or may not have been the source, even though it was positive.
That's really good information. Thank you for that, Ben.
Very welcome.
Okay, thank you.